perfectly fine. We won't have too big a group, but at the same time, often I have found in groups where people gather around a common hurt, it's amazing how supportive they become for each other as well. I attended a youth event. By the way, thanks, Mel, for setting up the sound system here so you don't get that crazy feedback we had last week, which blew you out of your seats almost. So, I attended a youth function a number of years ago. It was General NYI, Nazarene Youth International, and it brought youth from across North America together. It was a phenomenal event, and it had a great motto and a theme that said, "It starts with you today. It changes us forever." And I loved the optimism of that. I love the imagery that it had that was a part of it. And I have to say, as I've had opportunity to at times sit down and interact and connect with young people today, I just love their heart and do believe that they do provide us a hope for the church as it moves forward and on, and nothing too shallow about what they believe along the way. Now, I'd love it if we could just simply live and work in that kind of a setting. There is, however, in contrast almost to that optimistic kind of a statement, there's a statement, 5 simple words that in my mind is the most debilitating, destructive statement you can make to anybody along the way. You want to pull the rug out from under somebody, you want to pour cold water on eager hopes, great aspirations. There is nothing that will do this better than those 5 simple words. It has defeated more optimists and deflated more possibility thinkers and doomed more dreamers than any other statement I can know. And those 5 simple words are, I'm going to get that's it. You don't make a difference. It's true, isn't it? How harsh and hard and that. And if you think about it, there's nothing that will stop you in your tracks, nothing that will take the edge off of an eagerness or an energy or an enthusiasm to simply have somebody who says, well, it's not going to make any difference. Now, most often people don't just simply come up and tell you that quite that way. They coach it in kind of terms along the way. They'll say, I know your intentions are good, but it's probably not going to make any difference. I admire your conviction when they say that. It's probably not going to make any difference. You're to be commended for trying so hard. Or listen, why put all that effort into this when it's probably not going to make any difference? When they say that, they kind of are implying you don't make any difference. I worry about allowing that lie to seep and to soak into anybody's life. Now, I retired a few years ago after 41 years of active and busy full-time work in ministry, and daily and constantly engaged with people in all phases and passages of their life. And now the highlight for me is cleaning the garage and cutting the lawn, and the garage doesn't stay clean, so I have to get to do it again, and the lawn keeps growing despite the fact that it is growth time. Now, I love the life that I had. And I love retirement as well. But I watched things change at times and wondered at moments. And maybe some of you, did all those years, all that stuff ever even make a difference? Maybe you understand that, you feel that. Your sense of worth was tied to what you did and the stuff you did and the people you were with. And when you were most vulnerable, Satan, I can tell you, will whisper those words into your ears. But, who are you? It's not going to make a difference. It didn't make a difference. Then we take time to reflect, as you have done, as a congregation, in this group, and as a fellowship over the last month or so, as you have, if you've celebrated the memories of Sheila and Sharon, and declared very loudly and powerfully and in a very releasing way, Jesus Christ makes the difference in our lives. If we will fix our eyes on Jesus, we will find hope again. And it's modeled for us in the story that I want to share with you today. of a difference. So let me draw your thoughts to a passage of Scripture. You're familiar with it, John chapter 4, the story of the Samaritan woman. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing some disciples with more than John. And although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near a plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples, you see, had gone to town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. And Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and what it was who it is that asks you to drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and this well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock?" And Jesus answered, "Everybody who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become to them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water that I won't thirst and have to keep coming here to draw water." And he told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man that you now are with is not your husband. What you said is quite true." "Sir," the woman says, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but the Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship in spirit and in truth the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." And the woman said, "I know the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he'll explain everything to us." And Jesus declared, "I am the one who speaks to you." Let me move to a later part of here, where he says, "Many of the Samaritans Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to see him talking with the woman, but nobody asked, 'What are you doing and why are you talking to her?' Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to town and said to the people, 'Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?' And they came out of the town and made their way to him." And then verse 39, "Many of the Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. 'He told me everything that I ever did.' And so when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed with them 2 days. And because of his words, many became believers. And they said to the woman, 'We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man is the Savior of the world.'" We know this story very well. I propose to you that this story captures so well what it is like when somebody is walking through life feeling empty and barren. A life that seems to have make no difference at all. For many years, I preached that this woman, as many others did as well, and what we see in songs as well, that she was going outside of the town to gather water because she couldn't stand to be around the other women who treated her with disgust and disdain because of the result of her many marriages and her present living situation. I mean, she'd been married 5 times, now was living with a man to whom she was not married. And we made the assumption along the way that this was a sinful woman. A woman whose values revolved around an unfaithfulness, a looseness. And we assumed that her many divorces were because of infidelity. But we look at it through the eyes of Westerners. A Jewish rabbi who would look at this would say instead that there are many reasons why a man would divorce a woman in those times. And the fact that she'd been divorced 5 times and was still walking around living would indicate that the issue was not infidelity. For that particular sin, she would have been stoned. That the more likely reason was not infidelity, but infertility. She was barren. She was unable to bear children. And in the Eastern world, where the primary goal and meaning of life for a woman was to bear children, and by that to enlarge the faith, her position and her place was one of certainly uncertainty. It was a religious obligation. The entry point for many into the Eastern religions is not people who are converted to the faith. That's something we understand, and we certainly would promote. It is the vast majority of Jews are born into the faith. You're not a Jew by the fact that you are become a Jew. You are born to be a Jew. You're Islamic by the very fact that you are born Islamic. You're Samaritan by the very act of being born as a Samaritan. If you could not bear children, then you were of no use. You made no difference in the world and their view and understanding. 5 husbands and no children. It likely was not a matter any further to her or to others that she was living with this man was not her husband. What difference does it make? None at all. And the well in town was a constant daily reminder of what she did not have. What she would never be, a mother. Better a lonely walk on a hot day out to a distant well than to be forever reminded of this terrible clinging failure in her life, that there was no prospect of that ever changing. I think about what the futility must have been like for her in those years. I imagine her first marriage, like most, are full of optimism and hope and those things. The second maybe was tentative and still anticipating, but didn't get any different result. And then the third and the fourth and the fifth. By that time, she had given up hope. And so she finds it easier not to expect to have hope. And so she simply assumes that she is not worth real love. We know how this woman thinks, because you and I have met people like this woman. We sit and we talk and they tell us in different ways that they're not accepted anymore. And even if others forgave them, they're not sure that they could forgive themselves. And maybe someone here is like that. Taking communion was a little hard. You're not sure that you deserve it. You're not sure God could forgive you. Or if He does, that it's real. And this woman represents every person, youth to adult, who's going through life and their daily tasks with a deep sense of longing for something different, something more. And so she makes her way, as she did every single day, to Jacob's well. And I kind of like the title of Hilary Price's book that she wrote about this woman, The Life That Changed My Day. Consider what takes place here. And consider this might be not a bad template for us as well in understanding our role in this world of needy people today. The first thing I notice simply is that he saw her. He sees us for who we are. That's sometimes a little scary. All of us. Everything about us. That's not a small thing. There's one of those remarkable, terrible, ugly stories in the Old Testament of Hagar. We find in Genesis chapter 16. Hagar, you'll remember, is the servant of Abram's wife Sarah. And she flees into the wilderness to save herself from the cruelty of Sarah, who was so jealous and vengeful because Hagar, who was her servant and that she'd given to Abram, was pregnant and Sarai was not. Now Hagar was not Hebrew. She's a pagan. She's an Egyptian slave who knows nothing of Abram's God. She's not brought into the family worship and sharing time. And she flees into and yet in the wilderness, God sends an angel to her with a message. Bob, not unlike what God does with coming to see Adam and Eve in the garden. A message of hope, a message of instruction. A message that says, you're not being missed here. That she'll have a son, and he's to call him Ishmael. And then there is this remarkable statement that comes from this woman whose life is so desperate, so broken. She gives a name to the Lord because she doesn't know what he's supposed to be called. She's not aware of that. She says this, you are the God who sees me. Would it surprise you to know God sees you? Has his eyes on you. Not that weird seeing it says, It's the seeing of somebody who loves you and likes what he sees. It would for this woman been a surprise. Accustomed as she was to being an invisible part of her world, people just didn't know what to say, what to do, or even to talk to her. Unimportant, unneeded, one who made no difference, and she's likely not to expect anybody at the well, and certainly not God. And we're always surprised, aren't we, when he shows up at the most uncertain places. And if you stopped her in that moment and said, what do you think he saw in you? She would have been puzzled because she understood the labels that she wore, good and bad. We understand. We all carry labels of sorts. She would have said, well, he would have known I'm a Samaritan. And Samaritans, you see, were the biological offspring, certainly, of the Hebrew people. They were the ones who were the ones who were left. That group had been taken off into exile by the Babylonians, and a remnant was left behind. And the remnant, as Babylonians brought another group into that particular area, they intermarried with them, and they had these children. And real Hebrews would have considered them to be a testimony to failure, because they would have said the Levitical code says you're not to intermarry here. And adding insult to injury, the Samaritans took on some of the Hebrew faith that they at least understood and know, but they did it all wrong, the Hebrews would have said. They only used the first 5 books of the Scriptures, and they established their center of worship on Mount Gerizim instead of the true center in Jerusalem. And for a true conscientious Jew, anything that had been touched by a Samaritan, any place they would have laid or sit or rode on, anything that would contain any kind of a trace of Samaritanism was something they avoided. She would have said, but he saw me, he knew I was a Samaritan. He knows I'm a woman. In a world where women were always understood to be inferior to men, a woman grew up in a home where the dictate was you obey your father, got married and moved to a place where now you obey your husband. She was divorced numerous times. It is evident from the discussion that Jesus saw her, all of her. And all that probably defined her in the eyes of others, but with a difference. This account tells us that God has a view of us. There's a sense of God's providential planning in this as well. I love verse 4. It's a little bit of a puzzle when it says, and he needed to go through Samaria. The fact is that the most traveled route for a Jew to get from where they were to Jerusalem was around Samaria. You didn't go through it unless you absolutely had to. It was the shortest route, certainly, but it wasn't a place you went if you could choose to do so. And it's interesting that as far as we can tell, Jesus wasn't on a timetable here. It wasn't like he had a schedule of appointments that he had to get to really quickly, so he was taking a shortcut. Indeed, we read at the end of this, don't we, that he actually ended up spending a couple of days here. He needed to go through Samaria. Why? And I believe he had to go through Samaria because in the midst of all the activities and all the things for him to do, in the midst of all of the people who needed help, along the way in this whole world full of hurting people, God was concerned about this lonely, desperate woman in a little wayside city in Samaria. Because he understood she would be the key to give hope and meaning to a whole world of people. I love that reality. There are times, aren't there, when we feel a little small and insignificant, sometimes even worthless, lost in a vastness of a world that measures our worth in ways that leave us feeling short and deficit. In the words of some people I have heard, it's like I could fall off the face of the earth and nobody would miss me. But the reality is God's unfailing love keeps breaking through with an outstanding message of worth and value and meaning in God's eyes. I'm certain that there were people of greater importance in the eyes of the world, and people with a greater background and better past than this woman, but in God's eyes, she was worth the side trip and the special journey. So were you. So are you. But not only does he see her, he sought her help. He takes the initiative to call out to her. He said, will you give me to drink? Think about this in a moment. The context here, this is the creator of seas and lakes and rivers and oceans. The God who can bring rains, and he is asking for a drink of water. In communication parlance, he's taking the one-down position, not the authoritative positions. He's saying, I need your help. He's asking for help that opens the door for communication. That receives her, accepts her, and seeks her help. I expect that nobody was asking her for help. But it's like the little boy and the loaves and fishes. It's like Zacchaeus. The countless other accounts we read where he comes seeking with a question, and he simply asks us, what can you help me with? Once the conversation starts, third thing, he listens to her. Here he is, eternal God, wisdom of the ages, and he lets her lead the conversation. He doesn't debate her, doesn't contest her, doesn't challenge her in all of this stuff. And have you noticed that sometimes the religious and zealous people in your world who come to visit you or who show up on your doorstep want to begin telling you their particular flavor of faith by saying, listen to me. And then they invite you to respond to canned questions. That doesn't warm our heart. It doesn't make us feel like they really care about us. They just are going through motions. Jesus doesn't argue. He simply listens. I mentioned youth at the start of what I was sharing here. And I'm not sure about you, but I find myself increasingly aware that I don't fully understand the world they live in. The things that move them, the values that they hold on to. And that's probably something new. I think our parents probably had much, the generation before us has struggled as well. And I think one of the most effective and enlarging things for us old folk to do is to simply strive to listen. What do they have to say? And listening, sometimes we can be amazed at the depth of what's happening in their soul. Now, I should warn you, however, they're different. I don't get tofu and quinoa versus steak and potatoes. This is a dietary choice that makes sense. I affirm creation care. In fact, our manual is a great section that deals with that particular thing. I love their passion for the environment, even if I think sometimes the ideas are kind of impractical. But I listen and I read and I seek to hear, what are you trying to say? See, because differences can divide us. They can cloud our thinking and obscure our view and make it difficult to remember what's the most important thing here. When there are things that crowd into the demanding priorities of our thinking and belief, but missionaries will tell you constantly that their biggest job when they move on to a mission field is understanding what the gap is between what's right and wrong, and sometimes what they will say, well, no, this is the right way to do this, or the way you're doing that is wrong, when in fact it's just different is all that it is. Not about right and wrong. There are certainly some of those things. That's a part of the challenge. A colleague once gave me this piece of advice that I think is wise. He said, pray that you will learn the language that the people you have a burden for are talking. Pray that you will learn the language that the people you have a burden for are talking. The best way to do that is to listen, to learn the language of their heart and soul. I don't mean use their lingo and speech patterns. I certainly don't mean listen to their music. I mean taking the time simply to read about the stuff that weighs heavy on their heart and soul. the stuff they're passionate about, even if it's not something that is as heavy to you. Listen for the language of their heart. We see Jesus doing that. He listened and he learned about her. You've heard the statement many times, to know me is to love me. It could also be stated, to love me is to get to know me. In the listening and the learning, we find an avenue and means by which we can be the hope that Christ has for this world. Here's this woman who has been traveling each day past the well in town to this distant well. And I'm told that this particular well was about a half a mile out of the town. It would not have been the primary well that was used by the people. The water wouldn't have been good. It was good enough for a traveling nomad who wanted to feed their camels and their livestock. It was hard, it was stagnant, it wasn't good for people. Yet every day she would come out here to this. The ritual of getting water was an irritating necessity. Nothing about it that was appealing or meaningful. She simply came out every day because she needed water. It's the same way with her faith. She clearly has been versed in understanding her particular religious worldview. And what a Hebrew man like Jesus would have been about as well. But it's all about surface issues and minor issues of where we worship rather than who we worship. For the woman at the well, all of these differences were important. For Jesus, one thing only was important, and that was her. And she had a need that he could fill. And so he spoke to her of living water, of a life more meaningful and worthy than the one she was living. She sought for unfailing love and acceptance, and found in depending on only human love that was filled most often with broken promises and shattered dreams. She knew how empty it was. Why make commitments if you're just going to watch them walk out the door? But in listening, Jesus learned about her. And learning about her, he was able to come with a message of something real and lasting and meaningful. Living water. I know this. This woman at the well needed a new and a better life. No doubt, like all of us came to Jesus and had to accept the fact that we've got mistakes and sins in the past. But she puzzled over details. Where do you go for forgiveness? Which mountain is the right one? Which sacrifice will be good enough? What will it take to make a difference in this world? What do you do when it seems like your life doesn't have meaning? And Jesus' answer is to come and say, open to his spirit, to his truth. We do that often still in sitting with somebody along the way. They want to know, what is this living hope that we have? And we'll say it begins first with an acceptance of the fact that we've all messed up. We've all failed. We need something other than what we can do ourselves. Acceptance. Acknowledge that we want to say and believe that Jesus Christ did something on a cross and died for us, that purchased for us this great forgiveness, what we celebrate every time we partake of communion. Choose. Claim the promise that is there. If we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Finally, in coming to her, he was able to show her a love for her that she had not experienced before, a love that embraced her despite her shortfallings and failures and mistakes, and simply received the wonder of a God who loved her just as she was, and saying, your life has meaning. I have noted in the culture for the Hebrews and the Islamics alike, still today, the most common way of spreading their faith was to give birth. You know how different the new kingdom is when this barren woman goes from this encounter with Jesus at the well and bears testimony to who he is in her village and in this place where she found so much rejection. And she becomes, in a sense, the mother of a host of individuals who come to new life in this place. Sharing her new hope, she is in some ways the first evangelist of the New Testament, making all the difference in the world. I mentioned about that challenge sometimes, retirement and wondering about things. I look back and think all that stuff we worked on and did and those things, and others come along and it gets changed or dissipates away, is gone. But I imagine in that village, for generations to come, people would talk about this woman and what her legacy has meant to them. And that's the hope that all of us have, in simply being faithful to follow him and trust that that legacy will carry on no matter what changes in this world. That there is hope and meaning that comes to us in simply following him. Father, I come and I thank you indeed for this story of a journey for somebody. We came to an understanding and awareness of not just simply a hope, but a living hope. One that sprang up within and gave her a refreshing life. I thank you for the reminder that it is not simply for her, but for us as well. And that we have the privilege, oh Father, of going into this world that we are a part of and being for Jesus the messenger of living water, new hope, help, and encouragement. Guide us, O Father. Inspire us and direct us. I pray this in your name. Amen. Let us